In the history of Christianity, few figures are as widely recognized, yet as little understood, as Mary, the mother of Jesus. Her image is familiar across cultures and centuries. She appears in art, liturgy, and tradition as the young woman who gave birth to Jesus Christ in the small town of Bethlehem. Her story is most often told at the beginning of the Christian narrative, during the events surrounding the Nativity. But beyond those early moments, the historical record becomes remarkably quiet. The canonical Gospels offer only brief glimpses of her later life. After the childhood accounts, most notably preserved in the writings attributed to Luke the Evangelist, Mary appears intermittently, often at the margins of major events. She is present during key moments of Jesus' ministry, and most significantly, she is recorded as a witness to his crucifixion under Roman authority. After that, the details become scarce. Yet, early Christian texts, particularly the Acts of the Apostles, place her within the first community of believers in Jerusalem. Later traditions, developed over centuries, suggest that her life extended far beyond the scenes most commonly depicted in Scripture, possibly reaching as far as Ephesus. This documentary explores a question often overlooked. What happened to Mary after the crucifixion? Drawing from biblical texts, early Christian writings, and long-standing historical traditions, this film reconstructs a life that unfolded largely outside the spotlight of recorded history. It examines her role in the earliest Christian community, her possible influence on the transmission of foundational narratives, and the traditions surrounding her later years. At its core, this is not only a historical inquiry, it is an exploration of how memory, testimony, and quiet faith helped shape one of the most influential religious movements in human history. Because while Mary left no writings of her own, her legacy may be embedded in the very stories that define Christianity today. The execution of Jesus Christ under Roman authority is one of the most documented events in early Christian tradition. Crucifixion, a method reserved for political rebels and the lowest classes, was designed not only to kill but to deter. It was public, prolonged, and deliberately humiliating. According to the canonical Gospels, the event took place outside the city of Jerusalem, during the governorship of Pontius Pilate. While many followers fled in fear, a small group remained near the site of execution. Among them was Mary, the mother of Jesus. Her presence at the crucifixion is consistently attested across multiple Gospel accounts, marking her as one of the few individuals who witnessed both the beginning and the end of Jesus' earthly life. This continuity is significant. In a historical context where first-hand testimony carried weight, Mary's position as a witness places her at the center of the Christian narrative, even if her voice is rarely recorded directly. One of the most notable moments described in the Gospel of John is a brief exchange between Jesus, his mother, and a disciple identified as the beloved disciple, traditionally understood to be John the Apostle. In this account, Jesus entrusts Mary to the disciple's care, forming a new familial bond in the shadow of his death. This detail has both theological and practical implications. On a human level, it reflects the social realities of the time. A widowed woman without a primary male provider would have been vulnerable. By placing her under the care of a trusted follower, Jesus ensures her protection within a new community that would soon define itself not by blood, but by shared belief. On a symbolic level, many scholars interpret this moment as representing the formation of a new kind of family, one rooted in faith rather than kinship. Mary, in this sense, becomes not only the mother of Jesus, but a maternal figure within the emerging Christian community. The crucifixion, however, was not the end of the story. In the days that followed, reports began to circulate among Jesus' followers that his tomb had been found empty. These claims, recorded in all four Gospels, form the foundation of the Christian belief in the resurrection. While the texts do not explicitly describe Mary's reaction in detail, it is highly likely that she was among those who encountered or at least heard these early testimonies. What is clear is that the aftermath of the crucifixion marked a turning point, not only for the disciples but also for Mary herself. The role she had occupied for decades, as the mother of a son living within the rhythms of ordinary life, was irrevocably altered. In its place emerged a new identity, less defined by family structure and more connected to a rapidly forming movement centered on the belief that Jesus was not only a teacher or prophet, but something far greater. This transition, from private life to historical significance, would shape the next phase of her story. A story that unfolds not in public proclamations or recorded speeches, but within the quiet formation of the earliest Christian community. In the weeks following the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, his followers regrouped in Jerusalem under uncertain and potentially dangerous conditions. The city, still under Roman control, remained politically tense, particularly during religious festivals that drew large crowds and heightened scrutiny from authorities. It is within this context that one of the earliest Christian gatherings takes place, traditionally identified as occurring in an upper room, a private space likely belonging to a supporter within the city. This setting, described in the Acts of the Apostles, becomes the backdrop for a defining moment in Christian history. Among those present is Mary, the mother of Jesus. Her inclusion in this gathering is significant. While the Gospels provide limited details about her role during Jesus' ministry, the book of Acts places her directly within the first organized community of believers. She is listed alongside the apostles and other followers, suggesting that her presence was both recognized and valued within this early group. The assembly itself is relatively small, approximately 120 individuals according to the text, but it represents a diverse cross-section of Jesus' followers. The core group includes the 11 remaining apostles, among them figures such as Peter the Apostle and John the Apostle, as well as other men and women who had been part of the broader movement. Also present, notably, are members of Jesus' own family. The Gospels suggest that during his lifetime, some of his relatives were skeptical of his mission. Yet by the time of this gathering, individuals identified as his brothers, traditionally named James, Joses, Judas, and Simon, are counted among the believers. This shift indicates a profound transformation, likely influenced by post-crucifixion experiences, including reported appearances of the risen Jesus. The group is united by a shared expectation. According to the account in Acts, they are waiting for the fulfillment of a promise, that they will receive power from the Holy Spirit. This expectation culminates in an event known as Pentecost, a Jewish festival that, in this context, becomes associated with the emergence of the Christian movement as a distinct and outward-facing community. The description of this event is symbolic and dramatic, a sound like a rushing wind and phenomena described as tongues of fire appearing above those gathered. While interpretations vary, ranging from theological to metaphorical, the significance is clear within the narrative. This moment marks a transition from a small, inward-focused group to a movement prepared to engage the wider world. For Mary, this represents a second pivotal turning point. The first was the beginning of Jesus' life, an event framed in the Gospel of Luke the Evangelist as the result of divine action through the Holy Spirit. Now, decades later, she is present at another foundational moment attributed to that same force, this time not initiating the life of an individual, but the expansion of a community. This parallel has not gone unnoticed by scholars and theologians. In both instances, Mary is situated at the threshold of beginnings, first biological, then communal. The aftermath of Pentecost sees rapid growth. Public preaching begins almost immediately, most notably led by Peter, whose address draws large numbers of converts. The early Christian message spreads through the streets of Jerusalem, reaching individuals from diverse linguistic and cultural backgrounds who had gathered in the city for the festival. Within this expanding movement, the role of eyewitness testimony becomes increasingly important. Although Mary does not appear as a public speaker in the accounts, her unique position as a witness to the earliest events of Jesus' life places her in a critical, if understated, role. In a community seeking to preserve and transmit its foundational narratives, individuals with direct knowledge of those events would have been essential. Thus, even in the absence of recorded speeches or writings, Mary's presence in the upper room signals more than participation. It suggests continuity, a living connection between the origins of Jesus' story and the emergence of the movement that would carry that story forward. As the early Christian movement expanded within Jerusalem, it began to encounter increasing resistance. What had started as a small, tightly connected community rooted in shared belief was now growing in visibility, and with that visibility came tension. The message centered on Jesus Christ was not merely theological, it carried social and political implications. Proclaiming Jesus as Lord existed in contrast to Roman imperial authority, while reinterpretations of Jewish law and temple practices challenged established religious structures. This combination made the movement difficult to ignore. Initially, opposition appears in the form of interrogation and warning. Leaders such as Peter the Apostle and other apostles are questioned by local authorities and instructed to cease their public teaching. However, as the movement continues to grow, the response intensifies. One of the earliest and most significant turning points is the execution of Stephen, often regarded as the first Christian martyr. According to the Acts of the Apostles, Stephen is accused of blasphemy and brought before a council. His subsequent death by stoning marks a shift, from isolated acts of opposition to organized persecution. The impact is immediate. Acts records that a great persecution breaks out in Jerusalem following Stephen's death, leading many believers to scatter beyond the city. This dispersion, while driven by fear, also contributes to the spread of the Christian message into surrounding regions, including Judea and Samaria. At the same time, leadership figures within the movement become specific targets. During the reign of Herod Agrippa I, further violence is directed at prominent members of the community. James the Apostle is executed and Peter the Apostle is arrested. These actions indicate a deliberate effort to destabilize the movement by removing its leadership. For individuals within the community, including Mary the mother of Jesus, these events would have carried both personal and collective significance. Mary had already witnessed the execution of her son under Roman authority. Now, she is part of a community experiencing similar patterns of suppression. The repetition of violence, targeted, public, and intended to intimidate, would have reinforced the precarious nature of their situation. In practical terms, Jerusalem was becoming increasingly unsafe. Homes could no longer be assumed secure. Gatherings risked exposure. Association with the movement carried potential consequences not only for individuals, but for entire households. It is within this environment that decisions about relocation would have become necessary. Early Christian traditions suggest that John the Apostle, who had been entrusted with Mary's care, eventually left Jerusalem. While the exact timing is not definitively established, multiple sources indicate that he traveled beyond Judea as the movement expanded and conditions in the city deteriorated. According to long-standing tradition, Mary accompanied him. This transition marks a significant geographical and cultural shift. Up to this point, her life had been rooted within a relatively limited region, primarily within the areas of Galilee and Judea. Leaving Jerusalem would not simply mean a change of residence. It would involve entering a broader, more complex world shaped by Roman infrastructure, diverse populations, and unfamiliar customs. The dispersion of early Christians is often viewed as a catalyst for the global spread of Christianity. But on an individual level, it also represents disruption. Communities were divided. Familiar environments were left behind. And individuals like Mary, whose life had already been marked by profound change, faced yet another transition, this time not defined by a single event, but by an ongoing need to adapt. In this context, persecution did not merely threaten the survival of the movement. It reshaped it. What had once been concentrated in a single city began to extend across regions, carried by those who left under pressure. And as the movement moved outward, so too did the lives of those at its center, including Mary. Her next chapter would unfold far from Jerusalem, in a setting that differed dramatically from the one she had known. Following the escalation of persecution in Jerusalem, early Christian leaders sought safer locations to continue their work. One of the most consequential migrations involved John the Apostle and Mary the mother of Jesus leaving the city to settle in Asia Minor, in a region that would later be part of modern-day Turkey. Ephesus, a Roman metropolis, became their new home. With an estimated population of 250,000, it was one of the largest cities in the Roman Empire. The city's urban landscape reflected its economic, cultural, and religious significance. Marble streets, theaters capable of seating tens of thousands, public baths, and grand libraries. Dominating the skyline was the Temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, a testament to the city's wealth and pagan traditions. This relocation marked a dramatic contrast to life in Judea. Mary, accustomed to the rural simplicity of Nazareth and the stone houses of Jerusalem, was now confronted with a sprawling, diverse, and cosmopolitan environment. The city teemed with merchants, travelers, and officials, speaking a variety of languages: Greek, Latin, Aramaic, and more. Its markets overflowed with goods from across the Roman world, from spices to textiles to exotic animals. Yet, even amidst this foreign and bustling environment, John and Mary established a household reminiscent of her life in Nazareth. According to tradition, John settled her on a hillside, away from the crowded streets, in a small stone house that offered both practical shelter and spiritual stability. Archaeological investigations suggest that this site aligns with descriptions preserved through local Christian memory, including observations recorded in the 19th century by visitors following the visions of and Catherine Emmerich. Foundations date to the 1st century, and the modest dimensions and layout evoke the simplicity of rural Galilean homes. This house became both a refuge and a center of continuity. It allowed Mary to continue familiar routines, preparing food, tending her household, and engaging in daily prayer. While she was removed from the epicenter of early Christian leadership, Her presence maintained a symbolic link between the origins of the movement in Judea and its emerging presence in Asia Minor. For the Christian community, Ephesus represented an opportunity for growth. Missionaries traveled from city to city, spreading the message beyond the confines of Jerusalem, while Mary's role, as a living witness to Jesus' life, continued in quiet but profound ways. Her testimony offered a tangible connection to the events that had inspired the movement, reinforcing its historical credibility for new believers encountering Christianity far from its birthplace. The juxtaposition of Mary's personal continuity and the city's transformation underscores a broader historical pattern. The early Christian movement often thrived in new cultural contexts by establishing stable households and networks that could both sustain life and transmit tradition. In Mary's case, this continuity was literal, familiar routines in an unfamiliar setting. It also had symbolic resonance. Her life became a bridge between the rural origins of the faith and its urban expansion across the Roman Empire. By situating Mary in Ephesus, early Christian writers and traditions emphasized the endurance of memory, faith, and witness. Even as the movement faced external pressures from persecution, political instability, and cultural pluralism, these core elements remained intact, providing stability and legitimacy to a faith still in its formative stages. Mary's settlement in Ephesus thus represents more than relocation. It embodies the intersection of personal history, historical witness, and the geographical spread of early Christianity. Here, she would spend her remaining years, quietly influencing the faith she had nurtured from its earliest beginnings, while the world around her continued to evolve in ways she could neither predict nor control. Mary's years in Ephesus were marked by a remarkable blend of continuity and adaptation. Though she had left the familiar landscapes of Galilee and Jerusalem, she carried with her the foundational experiences that had shaped her life: her early faith, her witness to the ministry of Jesus Christ, and the intimate knowledge of events that would become central to the Christian narrative. Historical accounts and early Christian traditions suggest that she lived in relative seclusion, yet her home became a center of spiritual influence. In a city as cosmopolitan as Ephesus, Mary's presence symbolized a direct connection to the origins of the movement. Missionaries, travelers, and new believers reportedly visited her home, seeking guidance and first-hand recollections of Jesus' life. This domestic setting, humble stone walls, a single main room, a small sleeping chamber, and the nearby spring, offered stability amidst a world of change. Daily routines such as grinding grain, baking bread, and tending her household provided rhythm and structure, while prayer and reflection anchored her spiritually. These activities were not merely domestic, they were acts of faith. By maintaining her practices, Mary embodied the continuity of devotion that had defined her life from adolescence through the ministry and crucifixion of her son. Ephesus itself was a city of contrasts. Its bustling streets, theaters, temples, and marketplaces reflected both wealth and diversity, but also religious tension. The worship of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, dominated public life. Polytheistic rituals, civic ceremonies, and political authority were interwoven, creating a complex cultural and religious environment. Christians in the city had to navigate these dynamics carefully, balancing visibility with security. For Mary, adaptation did not mean abandoning her identity or role. Instead, her influence was subtle yet significant. She transmitted knowledge orally, recounting events of Jesus' birth, childhood, and ministry to those willing to listen. These narratives were critical to the formation of the early Christian memory, as they supplemented the accounts being spread by the apostles and disciples. The presence of eyewitnesses like Mary lent authenticity to the faith in ways that written texts alone could not achieve. In a period when literacy was limited and oral tradition was paramount, hearing stories from someone who had directly experienced the events of Jesus' life was profoundly impactful. Her testimony helped shape not only theological understanding but also the communal cohesion of believers in a foreign city. Archaeological evidence suggests that small Christian communities in Ephesus, including house churches, emerged in close proximity to residential areas. Mary's home, positioned on a hillside overlooking the city, may have served both as a sanctuary for daily life and as a point of gathering for believers seeking guidance or reassurance. Mary's life in Ephesus illustrates a broader historical principle. Early Christianity often spread through personal relationships and lived witness rather than formal institutions. Her example demonstrates how ordinary practices, household management, prayer, and conversation, can intersect with extraordinary historical significance. Even in her later years, Mary's presence underscored the continuity of the faith. She represented the living memory of Jesus' earliest experiences, bridging the gap between rural Galilee, Jerusalem's upheaval, and the cosmopolitan world of Asia Minor. Through her quiet endurance, she exemplified the ways in which personal devotion, witness, and routine could reinforce the growth and resilience of a fledgling religious movement. In Ephesus, Mary's life became a testament to perseverance and faith. It was a life lived quietly, yet one that carried immense historical weight, ensuring that the foundational stories of Christianity remained grounded in eyewitness experience, even as the movement spread across the Roman Empire. Mary's life in Ephesus was not recorded in formal histories or canonical texts beyond the brief references in the New Testament, yet her influence persisted through memory and testimony. Her role highlights an often overlooked aspect of early Christianity, the power of lived experience to shape communal identity and historical understanding. As the sole witness to events from the Annunciation to Jesus' ministry, crucifixion, and resurrection, Mary held a unique position within the early church. Her recollections were transmitted orally to the apostles and to new believers arriving from various regions, providing the narrative foundation for texts like the Gospel of Luke. Scholars note that Luke, though never a direct disciple of Jesus, relied on eyewitness accounts to compile his detailed narrative, accounts that were in many cases mediated through Mary's own testimony. Without such first-hand narratives, the central stories of Christian tradition, from the Nativity to the boy Jesus in the temple, would have lacked a direct source, and the shaping of liturgical and cultural practices, including Christmas traditions, might have differed significantly. Ephesus, as a Roman provincial city, presented both challenges and opportunities for this transmission of memory. The city's diversity meant that Mary's stories had to reach audiences unfamiliar with Judean culture, Hebrew scripture, or Galilean geography. Yet this multicultural environment also enabled her testimony to influence a wider range of communities, embedding the story of Jesus into a broader cultural and social framework. The house she inhabited became a conduit for early missionary work, linking the intimate domestic life of a woman in her 60s with the expansion of a global faith. Historians highlight that the endurance of memory required both trust and repetition. Visitors and disciples would listen carefully, commit stories to heart, and later share them with others, forming a chain of oral transmission. Over time, these narratives were codified, becoming part of the texts, hymns, and communal practices of the Church. Mary's quiet diligence ensured that the foundation of Christian teaching retained both fidelity to original events and personal authenticity. The legacy of Mary's memory is also evident in pilgrimage traditions. The site traditionally associated with her final residence on the slopes of Bulbul Dagi became a destination for pilgrims over centuries, including visits by multiple popes. Whether these sites preserve the exact historical reality or reflect devotional continuity, they underscore the symbolic weight of her presence in shaping Christian consciousness. Pilgrims leave prayers, light candles, and recount the stories she once told, rituals that bridge ancient memory with contemporary faith. By examining Mary's influence in this way, historians gain insight into the interplay between individual agency and communal formation. She demonstrates that the impact of ordinary life, prayer, conversation, household management, can extend far beyond immediate surroundings when linked to historical events of profound significance. In essence, Mary's life in Ephesus represents a convergence of private devotion and public history. While she did not hold formal authority, preach publicly, or write texts, her testimony enabled the early church to maintain continuity with its origins. Her memory became a living archive, transmitting knowledge that would inform theology, culture, and the collective imagination of billions. Understanding Mary's role encourages a re-evaluation of historical influence. Not all impact is measured in official records, decrees, or publications. Sometimes, it is found in the persistence of memory, the reliability of witness, and the quiet dedication to preserving stories that define communities across generations. In this light, Mary's final years in Ephesus are not merely personal. They are historical, cultural, and foundational to the enduring spread of early Christianity. The final chapter of Mary's life, as preserved in tradition, reflects a remarkable continuity of faith and witness. Settled in Ephesus, she spent her remaining years in a quiet domestic environment, maintaining the routines that had defined her existence for decades: prayer, household work, and reflection. These practices, while ordinary in appearance, carried extraordinary historical significance. Mary's presence served as a tangible link between the formative events of Christianity and the emerging communities spread across the Roman Empire. By living among believers in Ephesus, she provided continuity with the early experiences of Jesus' life, allowing oral traditions to flourish. Her testimony, though never formally recorded by her, was instrumental in shaping the narratives that would become foundational texts for the Church. The significance of her life extends beyond personal devotion. Mary embodies the intersection of historical witness and cultural transmission. In a period of political turbulence, persecution, and social upheaval, her steady presence exemplified resilience. The early church relied not only on the written accounts of apostles but also on the lived experiences of those who had observed Jesus firsthand. In this sense, Mary's role was indispensable. She was a custodian of memory, bridging generations and geographies. Pilgrimage sites associated with Mary, such as the traditional house on Bulbul Dagi, highlight the lasting influence of her life. Archaeological investigations suggest continuity of habitation in the 1st century, while the enduring veneration by Christians and Muslims alike underscores the symbolic resonance of her witness. Visitors to these sites are participating in a tradition that links the ancient world with modern faith practices, a testament to the enduring power of historical memory. From a broader historical perspective, Mary's life illustrates the dynamics of early Christian expansion. The movement's spread depended not only on missionary activity and written texts but also on trusted individuals who could bear witness to foundational events. Mary's testimony, conveyed orally over decades, helped establish credibility and cohesion among early communities, especially in regions far removed from Judea. Her story also demonstrates the subtle yet profound ways ordinary lives shape history. Though she never led armies, issued decrees, or authored texts, her influence is found in the preservation and transmission of knowledge that became central to Christianity. Mary's life in Ephesus exemplifies how steadfast devotion, lived quietly but faithfully, can leave an enduring imprint on culture, faith, and historical understanding. Ultimately, Mary's journey, from Nazareth to Jerusalem, from witnessing the crucifixion to relocating across the Mediterranean, reflects a broader human and historical truth. Enduring faith often manifests in continuity, patience, and the preservation of memory. Her life reminds us that history is not only made in moments of public spectacle but also in quiet, faithful acts that sustain communities and ideas across generations. In Ephesus, on the slopes of the Mountain of Nightingales, Mary's story concludes not with dramatic fanfare but with steady, faithful presence. A life fully aligned with belief, witness, and historical significance. Through her, the origins of Christianity remain anchored in the lived experience of those who saw, remembered, and carried forward the story of Jesus Christ. Mary's life offers more than historical insight. It provides a lens through which we can understand the enduring power of memory, witness, and devotion. As viewers, we are invited to consider the impact of individuals whose contributions may not appear in formal records, yet shape communities and history in profound ways. Take a moment to reflect on the intersections of personal faith, historical events, and cultural transmission. How does the quiet dedication of one person influence the broader story of a movement? How do traditions survive and spread through human memory, testimony, and daily practice? For those interested in deeper study, exploring both the archaeological and textual evidence of early Christianity can illuminate the lives of figures like Mary and the communities they nurtured. Visiting historical sites, reading primary sources, and engaging with scholarly analysis offers a richer appreciation of how faith and history intertwine. Ultimately, Mary's story encourages us to value persistence, continuity, and the power of witness, reminding us that the seemingly ordinary acts of daily life can resonate through centuries, leaving a lasting imprint on culture, faith, and collective memory. By understanding her life, we gain insight not only into early Christian history but also into the enduring influence of human stories in shaping the world around us.